All right, let's talk about finasteride. You probably know it as a really common hair loss drug. But what we're going to dig into today is its deeply troubling connection to some severe neuropsychiatric side effects. And this isn't just about crunching numbers. No, this is really an investigation into a risk that, for some reason, flew under the radar for way too long. So think about this conflict. On one hand, you have a widely used drug for what's essentially a cosmetic issue, hair loss. But on the other hand, you have this serious and for a long time unrecognized risk of depression and even suicide. The evidence we're about to walk through suggests it took a full 2 decades for the medical world to really grasp how serious this connection was. Let's dive into that evidence. Okay, so what is all of this based on? Where's the proof? We're going to start with the overwhelming scientific evidence, which is really the foundation for this whole discussion. So, to really get to the bottom of this, researchers used 2 key analytical methods. The first is something called disproportionality analysis. Think of it like a safety alarm system. It scans huge databases of adverse event reports and flags a drug if it has a way higher number of, say, depression reports compared to all the other drugs out there. The second method is healthcare record mining. This is more direct. It's about digging into actual patient medical records to compare the health of people who took finasteride to a similar group of people who didn't. And what they found? Well, the consistency is just undeniable. This table lays it all out. We're looking at 8 separate independent analyses. They're from different databases, different countries, and they used both of those methods we just talked about. And just look at the key finding column. It doesn't matter if it's from the US, Sweden, or France, the story is the same. Significantly increased signals for things like suicidal thoughts, depression, and self-harm. You'll see things like ROR, HR, and OR. These are just different ways statisticians measure risk. The key thing to know is that any number over 1.0 points to an increased risk. And as you can see, all of these numbers are well above 1. So let's just let that sink in for a moment. 8 independent studies, every single one of them, pointing in the exact same alarming direction. This isn't just a fluke or a one-off finding. It's a powerful, consistent pattern. And we can actually put a number on just how unlikely this is to be a coincidence. If we assume for a second that the drug is totally harmless to your mood, the probability of all 8 of those studies coming to the same negative conclusion just by chance is 0.0039. That's less than half of 1%. To put it bluntly, the odds are overwhelming that this is a real effect. And this isn't just a statistical correlation, there's a solid biological explanation for what's happening. Finasteride works by inhibiting an enzyme, 5-alpha reductase. The problem is, this enzyme is also needed to create what are called neurosteroids. These are basically hormones in your brain, like allopregnanolone, that play a huge role in regulating your mood. So when you block the enzyme, you're also depleting these crucial mood regulators. And what's really concerning is that these effects can be long-lasting, even after you stop taking the drug. Okay, so this raises a huge question, right? You have all this evidence, a clear biological reason why this would happen. So why on earth did it take 20 years for this risk to be taken seriously? Well, the paper digs into this and points to 3 main causes for that massive delay. Let's investigate each one. The first major cause, gross underreporting. What was actually being reported to safety agencies was just a tiny, tiny fraction of what was likely happening to people in the real world. And just look at how massive this gap is. It's truly shocking. Based on what we know about suicide rates in the general population, researchers calculated that among 4.6 million users, you'd expect to see over 19,000 completed suicides over 30 years. The number of actual reports made to the FDA? Just 320. For suicidal thoughts, it's even worse. An expected 414,000 cases versus only about 1,000 reports. This isn't just a small discrepancy. It's a colossal failure of the reporting system. So why? Why is the reporting so incredibly low? Well, the reasons are as tragic as they are systemic. First, and most obviously, a patient who has died by suicide can't file a report. Then you have the families and physicians who often have no idea that the medication could be linked to what happened. And on top of all that, the analysis points out that manufacturers would often attribute these cases to the patient's pre-existing conditions, effectively shifting the blame. The second major cause for the delay comes down to what the paper calls the manufacturer's silence. Basically, a failure to investigate or share critical safety data, even when the warning signs were there. And this image really speaks volumes. What you're looking at is a page from an FDA safety review back in 2010. See all that grayed out text? That's data about suicide reports that the manufacturer concealed, claiming it was commercial confidentiality. This is a perfect example of a complete lack of transparency right when it mattered most. And what's so jarring is when you put that lack of transparency right next to the company's public statements. On their website, Merck says, "The safety of patients treated with our medicines is our top priority." But the paper argues that their actions, or really their lack of action, like not conducting their own safety studies, tell a very, very different story. And the third and final piece of this puzzle, according to the analysis, is regulatory failure. The watchdogs who were supposed to protect the public were simply too slow to act. Just look at this timeline. It really shows you how slow the response was. The FDA added depression to the label in 2011. Okay, that's a start, but Europe's agency added a warning for suicidal ideation way back in 2017. The FDA? They didn't add a similar warning for suicidal ideation and behavior until 2022. That's a 5-year lag behind their European counterparts, a delay that had very real and very serious consequences. So this 20-year delay wasn't just some abstract failure of bureaucracy. It had a staggering societal cost. The review actually quantifies the devastating real-world impact, both in human lives and in dollars. Let's start with the human cost. The paper estimates that over those 2 decades, hundreds of thousands of people around the world may have suffered from depression caused by this drug. And even more tragically, the number of individuals who may have died by suicide linked to its use is estimated to be in the hundreds, maybe even thousands. That is an absolutely staggering human price to pay for a medication that treats hair loss. And then there's the economic fallout. The analysis puts a number on it, a potential annual societal cost of $4.8 billion. That number comes from the costs of treating the increased depression and the lost productivity that goes with it. The argument is simple. That cost to society likely dwarfs any profit the industry made from the drug, making it a terrible deal for public health. So, after laying out all of this, the evidence, the history of failures, the massive societal cost, what's the conclusion? What should we do? The paper doesn't just point out the problem. It offers some very clear recommendations. All right, here are the 4 key steps they propose. Number 1, suspend sales of Finasteride for hair loss until its safety can be proven beyond a doubt. Number 2, mandate and, just as importantly, enforce ongoing safety studies by manufacturers after a drug is on the market. 3, systematically record the medication history in all suicide investigations to get better data. And number 4, make sure physicians are properly educated on these risks so that patients can give genuine, informed consent. And this really brings us to the take-home message, the core principle behind this whole analysis. It's something called the precautionary principle. And it's simple. For a cosmetic, medication, a drug you don't need to live, the burden of proof shouldn't be on the public to show that it's harmful. The burden of proof falls squarely on the manufacturer to prove that it is safe.